Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, the Federation of Community Associations for the District of Columbia, and the National Black United Front, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's at-large candidates forum for the DC City Council. First, I want to say thank you so much to all of our candidates for being here. We know you have a busy schedule, but we appreciate you taking time to speak with us this evening. You can give them a round of applause. Our moderator for the evening is Delia Kontoffs. She is an Emmy Award-winning reporter and weekend anchor who joined the WUSA 19 in June of 2010. Delia got her first break in the business right here in Washington, D.C., at the U.S. Senate Radio TV Gallery and at the NBC Network News. Among her most memorable stories, in Charm City, Delia's profile of a woman and her daughter living in a home with no electricity or running water got them in safe shelter. Her reporting on homelessness in D.C. has helped people get off the streets and reunite families. And her 3-year investigation into the D.C. Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs uncovered the human cost of an agency in turmoil as the council voted to break up DCRA. Delia's brand of broadcasting puts her at the crossroads of journalism and advocacy. She's passionate about elevating the stories of people in our community, holding the powerful accountable, and effecting change when possible. We are so thrilled and excited to have Delia. I call her the good news anchor. She is a resident of the District of Columbia, a great neighbor, and we look forward to you moderating this conversation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Toya, for that lovely introduction. And she did mention I am a fabulous neighbor, if I say so myself. But I do live in Ward 7. I'm a proud resident of Ward 7. Round of applause for that. Mom of 3 DC public school students, and so I have a lot invested here. And so I am looking forward to having a robust conversation, learning about each candidate, and really what's important to all of us here in this city to improve our quality of life, to improve the safety of our streets, and our general happiness and productivity here in the District of Columbia. So we have a large field of candidates, if you haven't noticed. And so we are already tight on time. We just started and we're already tight on time. So this is what we're going to do. We'll just start with a brief introduction. If I can ask each candidate briefly to go down the table, 30-second introduction, briefly just to tell us about yourselves and why you chose to run. After that, we will go into a series of questions that were chosen by our sponsors. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to those questions. We do have 2 candidates here, Ms. Silverman and Mr. McDuffie, who do have to leave at 6:30 for other prior engagements, so we will plan accordingly. So let's go down the line, starting here with Mr. Fred Hill, and we'll go down the line for a 30-second introduction before we start our debate tonight.
Thank you. My name is Fred Hill. I am a 25-year successful business owner here in the district.
I think your microphone, Mr. Hill.
How about that? There we go. My name is Fred Hill. I am a 25-year successful business owner here in the district, hiring over 500 DC residents. And my reason that I got in this race is I grew absolutely sick and tired of watching our so-called leaders abuse and use the people of this city, the taxpayers, the voters, the residents. And there was no way I was going to see another year go by without changing that. I'm a fixer. I'm also a veteran, father, and grandfather. Thank you.
Well, I want to use about half my time just to say thank you to the federal chapter of Delta Sigma Theta, the Federation of Community Associations, and I have some of my Mount Moriah family here as well. So it's nice to see all of you, and it's just meaningful to get to work with a group who has over 100 years of public service. I'm Graham. I'm a Ward 7 resident. I'm a man of faith. I have 20 years of operational and financial management experience, and I've been working on equity in the city for many years.
Good evening. It's good to see everyone. Thank you to the sponsors. Thank you to Delia for agreeing to moderate. I'm Alyssa Silverman. I am one of the 2 independent at-large council members. I've been an independent for 8 years. I will admit to you, after 2 years of COVID, it was a tough decision whether to run again. But I am going to, and I'm doing so right now, or I'd be somewhere else tonight. And that's because I want to continue the work that I've been doing, holding district government accountable, spending your tax dollars well, investing in the things that matter the most. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is David Schwartzman. I'm running on behalf of the DC State Green Party, the only ballot status party that does not take funding from the corporate and developer sector. I am been a resident since 1976 and I'm a retired professor from Howard University. I'm an eco-socialist and a climate scientist.
Good evening. Thank you for having us here. My name is Giuseppe Niosin. I am running as a moderate Republican this election cycle. I am born and raised Washington, D.C., born and raised in Ward 5, and I moved to Ward 2 with my wife. I am currently a project engineer at the Navy Yard, and I am a commissioned officer of the Naval Reserves, looking to keep on with my career with the Navy. I'm running because I care so much about Washington, D.C. I love Washington, D.C., and I just want to make sure that I can make it a better place for everybody.
Good afternoon, everybody. Quickly, I just wanted to thank the Devastating Divas of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated Federal City Chapter for putting this on, Federation of Community Associations, and the National Black United Front for putting on this opportunity for us to talk to you. My name is Kareem D. Marshall. I'm a product of DC, public school graduate, and my public school education got me to Dartmouth, got me into law school, and when I look back on the way DC is now, the reason I'm running is because I'm worried that my 2-year-old daughter will have the same opportunities that I had based off of the failure of this council to actually live up to their responsibility.
And good evening, everyone. My name is Kenny McDuffie. I am a father, I'm a husband, I'm a 4th generation Washingtonian and son of DC. For the last 10 years I've represented Ward 5 on the council, and I'm running to make healthier and safer neighborhoods across the District of Columbia. And I'm not just going to talk about the things that I want to do as council member, I'm going to talk about my results over the last 10 years of making the District of Columbia a place where it's more racially equitable, more socially just, and more economically inclusive.
Thank you, candidates. We should also make note that Councilmember Anita Bonds, the incumbent Democrat who holds one of the 2 at-large seats up for grabs, was invited, is out of town at another prior engagement and could not be here this evening. Let's get right into the questions. Because we have a long list, and I have some in my back pocket that I may pull out. But let's start with these questions, and again, we'll go down the line, 90 seconds for each candidate. The Board of Elections has determined that you meet the basic qualifications to serve on the DC Council. Can you share with us examples of contributions that you've made, ways that you've impacted your community, the city, or in your profession that you feel you can amplify as an at-large council member for the benefit of the entire District of Columbia? Mr. Hill.
Thank you for that question. First off, as I said earlier, I have built a workforce in this city of over 500 residents. I know full well what is needed to help change the quality of life for so many people here in the district. One of the things that we need to do right now is we need to actually have the council back in session on refunding our police department, which is going to help keep more of those people working, and that we need to raise the pay of every police officer, fire emergency staff, school teachers in the public system, and the sanitation workers. I have a plan that lays out 30% pay raise for all of those categories, and that money is going to come from better management in this government. Right now, we're pushing almost $1 billion in waste and abuse. So we need to keep that in mind when we talk about who we're going to vote for. As I said, 25 years of successful business, managing a multi-million-dollar company. Thank you.
The U.S. ranks last in developed nations in maternal mortality. In D.C., a woman is 2 times more likely to die than across the nation. 97% of the women who die of childbirth in this city are black women, even though only 44% of the population is that. I run a health equity program that serves over 100 million people with a signature focus on maternal health equity. We have an initiative here in DC, and I'm really focused on ensuring that every single person gets the support and services that they need. I also opened my home to guys coming home from prison for a decade, and together we built intentional community and mutually supported each other. I also know that we need not just to support folks as they're coming home in affordable housing, but also finding positive pathways. So I helped a number of returning citizens launch their own businesses, which now hire 40 DC residents. And I'm on the board of a nonprofit accelerator and venture firm that supports black and women-owned businesses. These are a few examples of what I'll take to scale if I have the privilege to serve.
Ms. Silverman.
Thank you. Let me talk about what I've done. Let's talk about helping families survive these past 2.5 years during COVID. So my committee, the Labor Committee, took a system that was outdated, the UI system, and made sure that workers were able to access their unemployment. Working with the administration, making sure not only that workers had access to unemployment, but my committee gave $30 million in the 21 budget so that hotels, restaurants, and other hospitality industries could keep workers on the payroll. Paid leave, it's probably one of the things I'm best known for. In this city now, if you have a baby or welcome a child into your family, you get into an accident and have an illness, or you're have to say goodbye to a parent. You don't have to do that you can do that and still earn money and be compensated on the job. It's an incredible benefit that has helped thousands of families in our city. And finally, let me say, I've looked forward. My committee started what's called the Healthcare Sector Partnership, so that when we're talking about health equity issues, that we train our own workers to work at the new hospital at Howard and in Ward 8. Those are examples, concrete examples of things I've done. Thank you.
I've been active in the Fair Budget Coalition for over 20 years. I first ran for office in 1998. My top priority was eliminating child poverty. And I ran several times since, and that was also my priority. And given our more than adequate tax base in DC, that should have been done quite a while ago. I advocated for progressive taxes, and we won a very important victory, and I deserve some credit for that, by the hike in the tax rate on the wealthy last summer. By the way, Councilmember Barnes and McDuffie in the first vote voted against that, but it was passed unanimously, and the mayor did not dare to veto it. So that revenue has gone to the DC Earned Income Tax Credit, to house homeless, and to early education educators' income. And that's a victory we need to build on, and that's what I'm running on, a Green New Deal for DC. We can make it possible. The working class of DC can take power. They don't have power now. It's the very wealthy, the big developer class that has power.
Mr. Neosi, examples of your impact in your profession that you could amplify as an at-large council member.
Of course. Growing up in Washington, D.C., I was a product of the Mayor's Youth Leadership Institute, which promulgated me an internship with Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. I interned with her for 2 years, learning all about governance in Washington, D.C., and I was a big proponent of the Congressional Arts Competition. I myself am a tenured trumpet player. I played trumpet in the Redskins Marching Band for a number of years, and that also, working with Congressman Norton, helped me get my nomination to go to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, where I graduated as a systems engineer and a commission in the U.S. Navy. From there, I went all around the world to over 50 different countries, and I'm bringing all of that experience back to Washington, D.C., because Washington, D.C. is known as a very international city. And so I'm bringing that experience right now I'm currently working as a project engineer, where I work on prototype acquisition, but I'm trying to use that wherewithal to make the council a better place. I don't think that we really have a lot of engineering mindsets on the council, and I want to use that to my advantage.
Mr. Marshall, 90 seconds.
If you don't mind, I'm gonna stand up. Energy's a little low. All right, so the temptation with this question is to run through my resume. We clearly don't have enough time to do all that for any of us. So what I will tell you is a couple of principles. I worked for the district government for about 12 years. I worked as a legislative director, agency attorney, and actually I worked on development projects east of the river, most notably East Capitol Gateway. So the plan that's being implemented right now to reclaim that project from a developer that just sat on it for a decade, I wrote that plan. I wrote that legislation. In fact, out of everyone up here, I am the only person that has written bills himself. I've written more bills than any sitting councilman. So if we're talking about the actual quality of productivity coming out of our legislature, you get a different quality of productivity when you actually have a principal who's written bills themselves. And that's what I can bring to the council. There are other things that I think we can talk about that have been beneficial to the government as a whole. Most of my activities have been around making sure that underprivileged, underadvantaged kids like myself have been able to access higher education. So I worked on admissions for darn near 20 years. My focus as this District of Columbia is to make sure that the kids that come up after us have better opportunities than we do. And with this current configuration of the council, you're not getting that. We have to make a change.
Thank you for the question. And I actually have to leave at 6 o'clock today, unfortunately. So I'm going to try to keep my answer brief. And I'm not going to try to spend too much time correcting the record. But I don't know who Kareem's worked for, but if you work for my staff, you know that I do offer my own meals as well. Because I'm somebody who's in the business of getting results. I grew up in this city. I experienced the issues that a lot of the kids today are experiencing when it comes to violence, when it comes to lack of opportunity, which is why I've spent my 10 years actually working to deliver results. When I got down there, the comprehensive campaign finance reform, one of the first things I've done. I've tackled housing affordability and all the bills that have devoted millions of dollars into the Housing Reduction Trust Fund. I've authored comprehensive juvenile justice reform, comprehensive adult criminal justice reform with the NEAR Act. I've also authored transformational bills like baby bonds, giving young folks some hope in a city of prosperity where too many people do not feel like they have an opportunity. I know what it's like to be in the District of Columbia, to graduate from Woodrow Wilson High School, Jackson Reed, and not think that there was any opportunity. And I got an offer from an U.S. Postal Service to carry mail, and that opportunity is actually what put me on the trajectory to stand here before you today as a lawyer, as a former civil rights lawyer, and a former prosecutor. And so, for people to talk about what they're gonna do, I have a track record in this city on the council of delivering results for people in the District of Columbia, Ward 5, and across the District of Columbia.
Mr. McDuffie, hold on to that microphone since you are leaving at 6 o'clock. I'd like to direct another question.
Quick question, I was mentioned by name, can I respond?
We're not doing any rebuttals, unfortunately, because we don't have enough time. But we are going to move on to Mr. McDuffie, and you'll have your opportunity to speak. I assure you of that. Councilmember McDuffie, your colleague on the council and your opponent who's here at the table, Ms. Silverman, reportedly said that this at-large race is your second option after your bid to run for the Attorney General was unsuccessful. Could you respond, and why should voters return you to the council?
Absolutely. Public service is my passion and my purpose. It is not a second option for me. If you look at the work that I've done at the council for the last 10 years, then you know how much I care about the District of Columbia. In fact, out of all the candidates in this race, I've got a more intimate understanding of the city, of our people, and of the need to show up in communities that have felt long disconnected from the city. I'm a Ward 5 council member, but I show up across District of Columbia where issues arise, whether it is in Ward 1 or Ward 8, because I care about this city. I'm a father first, I'm a husband, and these intractable issues that are affecting our city need more than rhetoric. They need people who are going to deliver results for the city, and I have a track record of delivering results about issues that matter. We're going to talk about all the things that people want to do. I'm asking you, check the record of how I've shown up for businesses like Check-It and We Act Radio, to put resources in the budget, to create opportunities to close the racial wealth gap. I've shown up, not only in the good times when there are graduations and ribbon cuttings, I've shown up during the tough times when there's violence in our streets, when there's blood in the streets and yellow tape and gunshots, and I'm going to continue to show up if you all elect me, because public service is a privilege. It is a privilege, and I'm a trustee of the people's votes.
Mr. McDuffie, thank you. Ms. Silverman, I'd like to get your thoughts on, and perhaps an explanation in regards to that comment. You said running again is your first option. However, you also indicated that you really had to think hard about running for office again. Why should people return you to the council?
Thank you, Delia. I will say that I think the social media environment is very divisive. I've worked my heart out, Delia, these past 8 years, especially these past 2.5 years. As I talked about before, when 200,000 district workers lost their jobs, I worked in the unemployment office to not only make sure I understood what the problem was with the claims, but I actually processed claims myself. But it takes a toll on you. When you're working as hard as possible, and I talked about paid family leave. That was a 3-year debate, and then we actually implemented the program on time, under budget, in a pandemic. And then I looked at how much money we were bringing in, and I said, we're not getting enough benefits to the employees and the business owners, so we increased benefits. October 1, you're going to get 12 weeks in all 3 categories, and we cut the tax rate. I will say I'm really proud of all those things and what I'm doing in workforce development, making sure that district residents have great jobs in our biggest industry sectors. But it takes a toll, Delia, and I'll be honest. I said, do I want to do this another 4 years? And I decided yes.
And why?
Because I think we're at a crossroads in this city. I'm concerned about, we need a new roadmap. We can't keep using the same roadmap from 1998 that we've been using. That's led to displacement, that's led to the public safety and public education crises we have right now. We have to figure out where we're going with our public education system, and I decided that I wanted to be part of that conversation.
Thank you, Ms. Silverman. We're moving on to another question from our sponsors, and a lot of folks alluded to the fact that we really need to be a council member for all 8 wards here in the district, and speaking about inequities, especially in communities east of the river. According to the 2020 census, there are roughly 170,000 people who call the communities east of the river home. Yet despite the valiant efforts of community groups and small businesses, we continue, and I say we because I am a resident of Ward 7, we continue to live in a food desert. Yeah. Some call it a food apartheid, with just 3 full-service grocery stores. Another fact, according to the 2022 Kids Count DC, about 1/3 of the district's school children, just about 50,000, live in wards 7 and 8, yet our schools lack resources. upgrades, they haven't been modernized, they lack the investments to educate our children. A disproportionate amount of our children east of the river travel more than 1 hour west of the river to go to school. Those are just two examples of the huge disparities in economic stability, health, and education between the wards. Here's your question. As an at-large council member, you serve all residents in all 8 wards. So what's your plan to address these issues? And I'm going to start with Mr. Niosi.
I'm going to stand up too because it's more fun. That's good. How long for the answer? Is it 9 seconds?
It's 90.
So again, my name is Giuseppe Niosi, and I have done extensive door knocking and voter outreach over in Ward 7 and Ward 8. I've actually had a couple meet and greets. And one of the big things I've learned is exactly to your point, the food desert should not exist. Frankly, I think that's abhorrent. And if I was a council member, I would look to address the food deserts. The other thing is, I want to make sure that everyone has a quality education. I am for parental choice, but that means I think that the parents know exactly what their students or their children deserve for the best education that they can possibly get. Lastly, the one big thing I really want to bring to the forefront is the idea that having spoken to many of the residents in the communities that I've been to, rec centers are not available. That's one of the things that most of the people have said. We don't have anything to do after school. We don't have anything to do, a boys club, any sort of adventure club. I think that's problematic because, frankly, we should have interest in other things after school. So that's how I would address some of those things.
Thank you. Mr. Schwartzman, same question. I'm switching up on you guys. Keep you on your toes. Seth was getting a little complacent, so
All
we're
right,
going to spice it up.
this is the issue of racial and economic disparities is really, addressing that is really at the core of why I'm running. And let me give you the most shocking statistic there. The life expectancy gap between black and white residents is shockingly high. Of course, white residents live quite a bit, more than a decade longer than black. And it actually has grown in the last 20 years. The gap has grown. This alone shows the utter failure of our trickle-down economic agenda of our DC government. And there are exceptions like Alyssa, who's fought that, and Janice Lewis George, my council member. However, this agenda is being promoted by the Federal City Council, which is the heavy weight on the council. This is an NGO, which actually represents the big developers, the bankers, and the corporate sector. And however, their agenda has been undermined by the victory I referred to, by the hiking the taxes on the rich. So there is now a path to eliminate racial and economic disparities, reduce and eliminate them. That gives us that opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartzman. Mr. Hill, same question, 90 seconds.
Thank you for that question. First thing we need to understand is that Washington, D.C. public schools are rated number 41 out of 51 states. When we talk about the food deserts, our council, our mayor just invested money into a new Wegmans store that was built in Northwest when the food desert is in Ward 7 and 8. How do we have people who are in charge making those decisions with our tax dollars that doesn't benefit the people? When Kenyon speaks about the NEAR Act, most people in this room may, and mostly all of you don't know, it was never even funded. So that is only ink, useless on paper. You cannot play with people like that. We understand why he bounced back and forth is because he chooses to be a career politician instead of using his law degree to do what he can do, practice law. Ms. Silverman, I would have recommended that you take another look, because what that suggests to me, what you said, is that you retire. And that when you are tired, you don't think right. And what we've seen from the three of you, Anita Bonds, Alyssa Silverman, and Kenya McDuffie, who all sit on the housing committee together, is that DC has had the worst housing rating before the pandemic that this city has ever seen. Thank you.
Mr. McDuffie, you're still seated? I thought you were leaving at 6. You must be anxious to answer this next question. I'll give you 90 seconds.
I am anxious because I think it's important if you want to be on the council to actually understand facts, not some alternative version of facts. And the NEAR Act is a transformational piece of legislation that people from around the country are calling us and asking about, because it ushered in a public health-based approach to crime prevention and intervention, making sure we put accountability both for people who commit crimes, but also for police to make sure they're accountable as well. And so we know that we can't arrest our way of the violence that we're seeing in our city, but we gotta make sure we're ushering in an opportunity to communities that have been long plagued by violence. The reality is, that's one of the transformational bills that I've authored since being on the council, but I've authored other transformational bills, including not just trying to attract the large grocers who really look at a map of where you want them to locate, draw a circle and 1 mile radius around it, and look at density and incomes. I work with people like Philip Sample, who started Good Food Markets, to make sure that was located on the South Capitol Street development. I am a person who recognizes and acknowledges we have to talk about race. Why? Because we have one of the most racially segregated cities in the District of Columbia when it comes to real estate and housing. We have one of the largest racial wealth gaps of any city in the United States, which is why I have prioritized racial equity, social justice, and economic opportunity. We need less rhetoric and more action, right? Because when Mr. Hill wanted action, he actually came to the council office and asked me for help because he knows I get things done down there. Don't lump me in with the rest of the council. Because I've been prioritizing these things before they dominated the headline with the tragic killing of George Floyd. And if elected, I will continue to do that to make sure there's opportunity for young people across our city.
Mr. McDuffie, thank you. Mr. McLaughlin, same question, 90 seconds. How would you address the disparities east of the river?
The question started about food disparities east of the river. Good Food Market is great, it's not a grocery store. I agree with Alyssa, we need a completely new roadmap. There's a lot of great speeches. There's also some great actions. I'm not saying nothing has happened, but we need fresh perspectives and qualified leadership to be able to get things done. And we need to be able to work across the aisle. We need to be able to work with business and community. I've lived east and west of the river. I have 20 years of financial and operational management experience. I'm an executive at a company. I also work deeply in community in many ways. I think to really think about how we end food disparities, we have to get into the really wonky details. It's not just capital expenditures to get someone there, it's operating expense to make sure they have the incentives to stay. If we're going to talk about schools, how are we talking about per pupil funding? It's the things that career politicians don't want to talk about in a forum because it's really specific details. We need folks who are going into the details and who are going to change things, and we need a fresh perspective.
Thank you. We will go to Mr. Marshall and end with Ms. Silverman. Mr. Marshall.
You hear me? Okay. So I think I'm fairly certain I'm the only person running that lives east of the river, right? So that didn't always be the case, right? We had a succession of council chairs that lived east of the river. We used to actually have at-large members that lived east of the river. They cared about us. They came over. We saw them when it wasn't election season. We saw them when they didn't need something from us. Unfortunately, the council has shifted towards the parts of the city that are a little more affluent, a little more dense. And I can understand that. Like, that's a natural consequence of a city that's experiencing rapid growth in concentrated areas. The population shifts. People are going to end up coming from those areas where they're voter dense. But I think there's a certain obligation that isn't occurring. There's an obligation to take that extra step, to know that the people who are underserved aren't just somebody that you put on your campaign literature or trot them out when you need donors or you want to look like you're working for the underserved. You have to take those extra steps to actually make sure you're in those communities, that you're hearing their needs, that you're addressing their needs. Now, serving east of the river will be a little bit easier for me because I'm from there and I live there. But I've lived all over the city. I lived in Ward 3, I lived in Ward 5, lived in Ward 1. So I know that there are different needs in different parts of the city, but I know they're connected. The reason we have overcrowded schools in Ward 3 is because people don't trust the schools in Ward 7, so they take their kids across town. Now, if we're really looking at this as at-large council members, we know that if we fix the problems and we fix the resource dearths that exist east of the river, you actually relieve some of the pressure off the system generally.
Thank you. I believe Mr. McLaughlin said he lives in Ward 7. Did you say you lived in Ward 7?
I said east of the river, though. He's on the other side of the river.
Oh, the new Ward 7. It's all good. It's all good. We welcome you to Ward 7. All right, Ms. Silverman, 90 seconds.
Well, I love when we talk about redistricting.
So that's for another night. We'll be here all night and get into that.
Here's what I'd say. I'm an at-large council member, and I swim in my lane. And what I mean by that is the way we do budgeting for our schools leads to inequity. Because we have a $19 billion budget in our city. We have plenty of money. Yet when I do school visits, as I did recently, there are roofs that are leaking. There are bathrooms that are walled off because kids can't, because there's water pouring into them. We don't have full-time nurses in our schools. Here's what I'm saying about the roadmap. Something is wrong. And one thing I think you can say about me is I ask a lot of questions and I keep working to get answers. Here's what I'll say. This new council needs a standalone education committee. It needs an aggressive chair who is going to really focus on the equity issues so we don't have schools in Ward 7. So, Martin Luther King Elementary isn't saying, somehow we're losing staff. That's nuts. Let me talk about Judiciary Committee. Okay, it needs to be smaller. People are feeling the city is unsafe. We need to address it. We need to address the real public safety issues. So we need to focus on our violence interrupter programs, MPD, FEMS, OUs, our Office of Unified Command, or Communications. These are real serious issues and we need a real focus on the council to address them.
Hold on to that mic,
Yes,
Ms. Silverman. I'm glad that you just pivoted over to public safety because that is our next line of questions from our sponsors. So how would you improve the district's current violence intervention efforts?
I think we need to coordinate. Here's 3 things. We need to have a strategy, especially a strategy to deal with all the illegal guns in our city. We need to have coordination. When I asked at a judiciary hearing, I'm not even a member of the committee, but a year ago, there was the deputy mayor, the chief, Linda Hartley Harper, head of the mayor's violence prevention office, and I believe the head of her violence interruption program. And I said, who is in charge of our, anti-violence programs? That's the answer I got for 10 seconds. I'm serious though. For 10 seconds, everyone was looking at each other. That's a problem. We need to coordinate. And then we need to figure out what we're doing in terms of the interaction between violence interruption and MPD and our other public safety programs. We have to work together. Right now, we're working separately. That's not a strategy.
Mr. McLaughlin, same question. How would you improve the district's current violence intervention efforts? You have 90 seconds.
I think it's an all of the above strategy, not one specific thing, so I'm going to go long term to short term. We've decimated the out of school time budget. Alyssa just talked about how we have a $19.5 billion budget. We only have $21 million that goes to out of school time, some of those rec centers, et cetera, that Giuseppe was talking about. We need to increase that. We need to think about how are we supporting our young people and having resources and support that they need to grow and grow effectively. I also think from a school standpoint, thinking about how do you have different pathways, vocational programs, apprenticeship programs, college pathways. How are we really supporting kids in knowing I have a pathway after I graduate or leave school? I live a block from Eastern. Kids hang out in my yard all the time, so now that I'm running, I'm like, Grant McLaughlin, running for DC Council. How do we help you reach your potential? And I hear so many kids scared about what's happening next. So I think that's one thing, the long-term solutions. 2, on the very short-term solutions, we need to adequately resource MPD in a way that we don't ask them to do too much. We don't ask them to be mental health professionals and social workers and other things, but we are asking them to intervene when violence occurs, and that we are supporting them in doing so, and that we are holding them accountable for their closure rates. We're then holding the U.S. Attorney's Office accountable. We're fulfilling the judicial vacancies that are lying fallow right now. These are all detailed strategies that take hard work and operational detail. That's the type of work you need on council to change things.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Same question, 90 seconds.
Thank you so much for that question. First, as I said before, council needs to refund our police department instead of defunding them. I've spoken to officers all across this city, and every one of them have leaned toward being 1 foot out the door because of the way things are going right now. The council, including the 3 council members that are in this race right now, all unanimously destroyed the morale of those officers. They took away from them the dream and the future of what they had planned. And neither of them had either been a security guard at Walmart to be able to tell the chief how much money he needs, or any of the officers what they need. We are overstressing our police officers, and we are overstressing our teachers and our public school staff. We are overstressing our sanitation workers and our fire and EMS workers. Everyone right now is under the gun. And unless we wake up and realize that first, as I said before, I've done the study and found that they are all 30% under what they should be paid. And that money will come from not paying $1,200 for $200 toilets on these construction projects and $8 for a $1.50 brick. We have got to get rid of the people who have no interest of the mass number of people in this city and put people in that can get it done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall, since you're up and stretching your legs. 90 seconds.
Thought you forgot about me. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to burn some of my time because I have to clarify something that both of the incumbents have said that's not true. Very frequently, these council members will pass bills with no intention or no idea of how to pay for them. That's called, they'll get a fiscal impact statement, which is basically, this is how much the bill costs. The NEAR Act wasn't funded for the first 3 years. In fact, those of us who advocated for changing the way we approach public safety complained frequently that the NEAR Act was underfunded or not funded fully. So let's be honest with residents about what we're dealing with. We have a council that does not treat its legislative responsibility seriously. If you're gonna write a bill, think through what implementation looks like. Get the FISP before you introduce it. Find out how much it's gonna cost. Talk to your colleagues. Actually win votes. Convince the people that you work with. Heaven forbid you have a conversation with the executive and convince them as opposed to just dropping a mandate on them, and then suddenly our city's working together. Suddenly it's safer. Now, one of the things I talked about earlier was the fact that we have violence interrupter programs that don't work together and they conflict with each other. Part of that is because our council did not go through the effort of convincing the executive that this was a process that they should engage in. So instead of actually going through the executive, which has the infrastructure and support to run a program, they dumped it in the Attorney General's office. So now we have violence interrupters in the AG's office and violence interrupters in the executive's office, and they don't work well together. This is not what responsible legislators do. We can do better. We deserve better.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Mr. Niosi, please. 90 seconds.
So one of the big things that I found when I was doing my community outreach was a lot of people just want to be heard. They want the time of day. They want their council members to be present. They want them to be approachable. So I believe in mentorship. I think that having a viable mentorship program is something very important. Actually, one of the organizations that I work with in Ward 7 is called Men of Influence, and they do a wonderful job either bringing youth off the streets or returning citizens and giving them a job. And so that's something I think is very important. But not only that, as Mr. Hill was saying, I do believe that we should have better funding for our police department, because having done 2 ride-alongs so far, I'm scheduled to do a 3rd, I was able to talk to a lot of our police officers, and they lack a lot of training that they really want. They want training to learn how they could as simple as filling out documentation, or just how to work with various community members. And then lastly, I do think that community policing in its own right is very important. Because I remember a time where DC, cultural DC, we had a lot of arts, we had a lot of music going on, and I think that that's something that should be reintroduced, and there should be a fire lit under it, because that's a great thing that we should be having is the arts. Which I love what the mayor has done with the development over in Ward 8 with the new arts district that they're having. I think that's great.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Schwartzman, 90 seconds.
Yes, the NEAR Act was a very important initiative. Neighborhood engagement achieves results. Charles Allen informed us recently the budget has increased for it. However, the mayor needs to pay attention to the DC Auditor's report, in particular to establish an Office of Violence Prevention and Health Equity within DC Health, and also create real cooperation with MPD and the Department of Behavioral Health to have teams go out to deal with behavioral problems. So this is a public health approach. That's what we need. And I participated at noon. I was listening to the Health Alliance Network's presentation, Ambrose Lane Jr. leading that, on violence. What's the roots? One of the biggest roots is poverty, and particularly child poverty. And we need to take very proactive action to eliminate child poverty. Simply, we have the tax base to do this. Okay, the corporate sector needs to pay more taxes to address this. This will improve the life of all residents, not only the children and their family, all residents.
Thank you. I want to do a quick time check. It's now 6:24. I want to remind everyone that there is water. Thank you, Toya. I want to remind everyone that we're streaming live on Facebook, on YouTube as well. We encourage our Facebook viewers to drop your questions in the chat. We will be tossing the microphone out to the audience around 6:45, so we have about another 15 minutes of questions from our sponsors. We're going to continue talking about public safety, then we'll go into housing. Around 6:45, we hope to turn the table over to our audience members, so please keep your questions in mind, write them down. We want to open the floor for you to engage with your candidates as well, and that goes for our audience tuning in on Facebook Live. We will monitor the chat for that. So we're moving on to another question. I'm going to combine a few because we're staying with the public safety theme, and we know that our neighbors in Prince George's County have just reinforced or are enforcing the curfew for young people. We have a curfew for young people on the books. You can argue whether or not it is enforced. One, do you believe that we should enforce, that MPD should enforce the curfew laws that we already have in place? Do they work? Do they not work? And I'll give you 2 minutes for this answer because it's a two-part. Because I do want to combine our young people, our victims and perpetrators of these crimes. And so the curfew is geared towards keeping these young people off the streets. However, we know a lot of these crimes are not happening at night. They're happening in the middle of the day after school hours. So one, do you think NPD should enforce the curfews that we have in the books? Why or why not? And two, what is a strategy to really address the crime that's involved, that's just, overcoming our young people in this city? So I'm going to start with Mr. Marshall with that question. And I'll give you 2 minutes.
I'm going to solve this very complicated issue in less than 2 minutes. Okay, so I want to start off with this. I am still not convinced that curfews are constitutional, and if you are approached by a police officer, I will remind you that you have an affirmative duty to assert your Fifth Amendment right. It is no longer assumed that you can. So that's, I think, is the most important thing. My biggest issue with reliance on a curfew, whether or not it actually works, is that it deals with symptoms, right? Like, this isn't necessarily about whether or not we're eliminating the causes of crime, whether or not we're making our communities more secure. We're just keeping a certain percentage of the population off the street at a certain time of day in the hopes that they won't violate the curfew and commit a crime. What I know it will do is increase number of contacts between younger students or anyone below the age of 18 and police officers. I think our police officers aren't really in a position right now to be the best people to be policing these types of issues. I think if we really want to make sure that we're addressing issues of crime, we have to deal with the parent of crime, which is poverty. And I don't see the curfew actually addressing that issue. Now, if I had a conversation as an executive or as even a legislature with our neighboring jurisdictions where we talked about doing something in a concerted fashion, because I think we know, I mean, those kids that killed someone over by the ballpark, they actually live in there. So if we're talking about actually addressing crime across the board, the first thing we have to prioritize is eliminating the causes of crime. But secondarily, we need to be thinking about how we cooperate as jurisdictions. How do we share intelligence? How do we share resources? But most importantly, how do we make sure that our kids feel like they have a future? Like, if you think you got something happening after you get out of high school, you're not really gonna go down to that stadium and carjack somebody and then sell a car for $500. Because you have a future, and you don't want to mortgage your future for $500. So let's talk about that just as much as a curfew.
Thank you, Ms. Silverman. Do you think that MPD should enforce the curfew? And what are the real strategies that you believe could curb the violence that our young people are involved in?
Yes. So I believe that curfew is a distraction from what is really disturbing to me, at least. We have 13, 14, 15-year-olds with access to guns. And that a curfew isn't going to address that issue. And let me say that my committee has put a lot of money into youth employment. We've vastly expanded the year-round employment program, which was local funds 0 to, we're going to have 1,000 slots in this upcoming budget. I can't remember what the budget number is. And we're reserving 100 of those slots for what, it might not be the most politically correct term, but at-risk youth. But I can put all the dollars I want into youth employment, but if we have kids who are dealing with conflict and trauma and settling disputes that start on social media with a weapon, then all the money that I'm putting into the SYEP and into the high school internship program just isn't gonna make a difference, in my opinion. So we really have to address this issue of access to guns and the behavioral health issues. I think so my committee did fund the violence interruption program. My labor committee provided the seed funding for the Attorney General's Cure the Streets program, and I'll tell you why. Because in Memorial Day of 2018, there was a horrific shooting. 13 people were shot, and I called the Attorney General and I said, let's fund your program, because the mayor wasn't funding the MIR Act. That's how it happened. And I think my time is up. Can I apologize, Delia? There is a conflicting DC Women in Politics forum that begins at 6:30. I had informed Philip weeks ago about this. I'm going to have to leave. I apologize to my fellow candidates and to all those who are here. I will be in a study carrel 302H if you want to find me after that forum. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Delia, for your moderation.
Thank you for your time. We're going to move on as Ms. Silverman slips out in the sake of time. Mr. Schwartzman, same question.
Yes, the same question. Goodbye, Lisa.
Bye.
See you next time. I brought clippings with me so I can quote from them. This is what a Georgetown University law professor and legal and policy director of DC Lawyers for Youth says about curfews. It's a really blunt instrument that criminalizes and impedes on the rights of young people, particularly black youth, the risks are high, the benefits are very low. And I know that black youth are frequently victims of harassment, and they are arrested in the enforcement of the curfew. We also know that there are far-right racist groups that have infiltrated our own police force. I'm not saying all the police are racist, of course, but that was documented in the Washington Post. There's investigation. They've infiltrated all over the country. So the police can be an asset, of course, but they could also be a problem. And black youth have been killed by police in D.C. Deontay Rawlings in 2007 was shot to death by 2 off-duty police, and the police never were held responsible. And there have been other killings since. And the police should be held accountable. We need a civilian police review board elected with subpoena power. Okay? We can't leave it to the internal operation of the police themselves. And now, I have to stop. And I obey the stop sign, unlike a few other candidates.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartzman. We are going to go to Mr. Hill, Mr. McLaughlin, and then Mr. Niosi. So same question, 2 minutes. Do you believe the curfew should be enforced? And what is your strategy in addressing this youth violence?
Thank you. I'm going to be absolutely different than everyone you've heard. As a father, a grandfather, and a veteran, no, on the curfew. It is not going to do what needs to be done, as what I'm about to say. The parents of these juveniles need to be held accountable and share the penalty of what their children are doing. Much of what the other candidates talk about today is long-term solutions. And then, yes, it needs to be instituted and carried out. But right now, when a gun goes off in the district, we shouldn't be standing up saying, did they have a mother? Did they have a father? Did they get 2 scoops of sugar in the Cheerios this morning before they're sentenced? They kill someone. That person is not getting a second opportunity. If that youngster kills someone and they're 18, they get to start their life back over again. We have got to wake up in this city and realize that the problem is us when we don't hold them accountable. And that's the first thing that needs to be done. Our judicial system is split. The Attorney General takes care of the juveniles, the federal system takes care of the adults. I say that if we put the penalty out there, that if it's 1st or 2nd degree murder, you are done. And I promise you, you're going to see a change. If you're caught with an illegal gun, instead of 2 to 45 years, what it is right now, it should just be a straight 50 years. Straight 50. You know it's illegal, you know it's not yours, you know you're breaking the law. A lot of people might not like it, but I've seen it. As a veteran, I've traveled to all 7 continents, and I've watched how these kinds of things only happen in this country. They have strict gun laws in other areas, and some have no guns at all. But until we wake up, we're going to continue to see this go in the same direction. Stop putting a Band-Aid on and fix it.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. I need 2 minutes, rather.
Well, I'm glad I'm sitting between these two because I think actually I would say my opinion is the same in between. But I'm actually going to center it on a voice that we haven't heard from yet, which is the voice of young people. So I volunteered once a week at DYRS, the Juvenile Detention Center, for a number of years, and then lost a lot of basketball games there on Saturdays as well. And I was on a call about 2 weeks ago with Chief Conti, the Trigger Project, and some young people talking about solutions to youth violence. And then you already heard about my informal polling of Eastern High School students. But there's a couple things that I heard every time from the young people. One was some of the things that we've already talked about of, I want to feel safe. I want to not have to worry that I'm going to get into some kind of beef when I'm walking to school. I want to be able to have the supports that I need to be able to graduate effectively, to have a vision for where I'm going, etc. And I think, Kareem and others spoke eloquently on that. And they also say Virginia doesn't play. And I think I disagree with Fred on some of the pretty large sentences, but the idea, where is there accountability to saying, if you hurt other people, it's not okay? And so, the solutions that I think we have to wrestle with as a city are, how are we supporting and wrapping our arms around young people? And how are we making sure, as they are on the continuum of victim and violent offender, that we ensure that we are supporting them and not going that way, and then if they do, escalating levels. I think the challenge that we have in many jurisdictions and here in the past is it's 0 to 50 years. How are we not saying, okay, you have this really terrible consequence when your brain is still developing, but at the same time, it is absolutely not okay to hurt other people, and we can't just let you get away with it. So I think we have to find that balance. I think we have to have accountability and solutions that are short-term as well as long-term to stop the violence.
Thank you, and finally, Mr. Neosi.
Thank you. One of the things that I remember growing up is we used to have the 11 o'clock curfew. Whenever I go out with my friends, I always had to make sure I caught the correct train to get back home, because if I crossed the threshold of my door at 11:01, my mom was going to kick my butt. And so I think that you're right. The people who are going to be committing the crimes are already going to be committing the crimes. I think that's where we need to address the issue. Because the curfew, I don't think, is going to actually work in the way we intend for it to work. If anything, it's a Band-Aid on the bigger problem. I would encourage to have some semblance of after-school programs such as trade schools or technical development programs where people, as Mr. Marshall was saying, where they can learn that they are going to have a future in whatever skill set that they want to have. One of the things I became aware of is, the military can actually go to high schools and recruit, which is, whether you agree with the military or not, it's certainly a job out of high school that is a prominent job. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, I do believe that accountability is absolute, and I think that we should focus on the leniency that we've been having for any of these sentencing for these young children. I think that we shouldn't necessarily be putting them in prison for 50 years, but there has to be a consequence for the action, that if they're going to commit a crime, they're going to do some time.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to housing. Another time check at 6:40, so we'll wrap up this portion and hopefully turn the mic over to some wonderful questions from our audience members. The city is facing an affordable housing crisis, particularly when it comes to rental properties. Some housing advocates have called for changes to the city's rent control laws to protect dwindling housing stock. What bill or policy do you support that will not only protect the city's affordable rental units, but also increase the number of them? Mr. Hill.
Thank you so much.
90 seconds.
90 seconds, okay. First, we must remember that we do not have affordable housing. It is only affordable to those who can afford it. The housing stock right now should be made based on a person's income and not the average median income scale that we use that's on the federal. We have 2 counties, which are the richest in the country, that bring that number way up. And so a lot of people are left out of that. I've said earlier that our MPD, our fire emergency staff, our public school system, and our sanitation workers are included in a plan that would put them in above the average median income. But here's some other things that we need to keep in mind. The developers that put forth the projects are in many ways being given an open door to do just whatever they want. And by the time it's done, the project starts out as being advertised for veterans, for seniors, for low income. And I've tracked 5 to 6 different projects that were supposed to have 20 or more low income families living in 280 units that now today only have 2. And because the public doesn't know what our council is not going to enforce, their friends get to go to the next project. And it should stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartzman. 90 seconds.
Well, I will begin by saying housing is a human right, so is education. So is the right to live at the highest life expectancy possible, which is being denied right here because of trickle-down economics. And we have the Housing Production Trust Fund, that's the main vehicle. It is based on really building rental market rate housing, which is unaffordable to a great majority of our residents. Market rate, it's not affordable. And then they have a sort of a trickle-down approach. Okay, you'll get some low income, but the DC auditors show they don't even meet the requirements they're supposed to. That's the short-term solution. Increase lower income requirements. The midterm solution is to decommodify the provision of housing. Okay, so you have social housing approach, Denise's George Green New Deal bill, and community land trusts. That's a way to implement truly affordable housing, which is defined as 30% of your household income. How many of you pay more than 30% of your household income for housing? I wonder, all right? We need to make that the goal, decommodify the provision of housing.
Mr. Marshall, 90 seconds.
Okay, so in 90 seconds, the biggest thing that we can do as council members to fix housing is to make sure that we have a competent person running the housing committee. We don't. The current chair didn't know the size of the wait list for public housing, wasn't even aware that the wait list was still there, has no real involvement in the development or vetting of performers for development projects, is kind of asleep at the switch. So here's what I can give you. As a first-year council member, I won't get a committee, but I can promise you that if I'm placed on the housing committee, every single development project, if I'm placed on the economic development or the housing committees, every single pro forma that comes through the council will be viewed with a deliberate eye. We won't necessarily say skeptical, but I'm gonna look at every single one. And I'm the only person with the skill set to do that because I'm the only person who's worked on development projects. What I can also promise you is that we need to be a little bit more creative about the way in which we deal with housing as a jurisdiction. Most of you live on blocks that have at least one or two vacant houses, right? Like everybody can think of one or two vacant houses that are in their neighborhood. Yeah. Now, if I told you that we know for a fact there are at least 10,000 vacant houses in the District of Columbia, I say we start with those. For various reasons, families aren't using these houses, they aren't renting them out, they aren't selling them, mostly because of title issues. Getting a lawyer on the council gives you someone who understands what tools we can employ to actually activate some of this housing. The problem is we don't have enough in supply. So if we can fix the supply issue, we can fix the affordability issue.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. We have two more candidates to answer this last question. We're going to pivot over to our audience. If we can ask audience members to form a line on either aisle, just to make it easier so we're not snaking through the seats, that might make it a bit easier so we can make this process smooth. So as we prepare for that, thank you, Toya. Mr. Niosi, the same question in regards to affordable housing and the crisis that the city is facing.
Thank you for the question. First off, I think that we need to address what exactly affordable housing actually means for the residents of Washington, D.C., because there are a multitude of different levels as to, we need single-family homes, we need, workforce development homes, we need, low-income housing. One of the things that I actually have a big problem is, we see a lot of development happening, for example, in the Navy Yard, and half of the people that live in those houses don't actually pay taxes in Washington, D.C., and I think that that's problematic. That they don't have any sort of vote in terms of who they want to guide. And I would also kind of address one thing that Mr. Marshall was saying is, as an engineer, I've worked on shipbuilding projects, which I know is not necessarily the exact same as housing. However, the thought process is very much the same, but the ship is very much like a small city. Exactly. So having an engineer with that expertise and quality assurance, I think, would pray well for the council. Thank you.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Well, having a brother who's in the Navy and has lived on ships, I really hope that I never have to conflate the two in my personal life. But I will also say, Kareem, you're on fire, so I'm not going to be too mad at you. I also have development experience, but I agree with a lot of the points that you made. And this is where, when the city and council members are here, they bemoan the fact that we're putting more and more money towards housing, and yet we're not getting the solutions, and they're going to take new actions and things. We got to have new people who know what they're doing on this if we're going to be able to change things. So like Kareem, I'm going to go into a lot of specifics because number one, we just need more housing if we're going to have more affordable housing. So we have to think about zoning. Are we expanding 2 and 4 unit zoning? Are we partnering with faith institutions to slightly tweak their zoning to be able to create more affordable housing? Are we thinking about public and quasi-public land and thinking about how we can increase from 10 to 20 or 30% the affordable housing on those lands? There's so many solutions I can keep going on to really talk through this. But we need council members who are going to get into the operational details, who understand the pro formas, and candidly who are going to work with developers because they are the housing producers to be able to say, how do we create something fair and effective, but also think about how we are creating public housing and working with nonprofit developers, which is what I'll end on as well. It can't just be production, it also has to be preservation. Because it's about $500K a door to create affordable housing, it's much cheaper to preserve. When we have that kind of holistic solution, that's how we're going to create more affordable housing.
Thank you. As we pivot over to our audience questions, we do have a few comments that came in from the chat. Thank you to those who are watching live on Facebook for your engagement. 2 comments: fund business support grants of up to $50,000 for DC local businesses with additional incentives of $25,000 for those who hire DC residents and participate in the Summer Youth Employment Program. Another comment before we go to an audience question: America already has the largest prison population in the entire world. Locking up more Black people isn't a viable solution to society's problems of inequity that they created. There is one more question in the chat, but I'll go to our audience members for a question. And if you can either direct that to a particular candidate or just, we're going to identify whether we're going to open that to the whole floor.
How you doing? My name is Charles Owens. Live in Ward 8. Yeah, I live in Ward 8 in a co-op. To you, Mr. Hill, I appreciate your 2 comments about housing and a remedy for the murders that take place. So anytime somebody gets shot or killed, they don't get a chance to come back. You have to do something, and taking a sledgehammer to the situation, it may be overkill, to use a metaphor, but we need to do something to stop the violence for young people who are afraid, and the fear is redundant. So I gotta go out and get a gun, a 17-year-old gotta go out and get a gun. So everybody has to get a gun just to feel like they're okay. You have to do something, and it may be over the top, but somebody needs to be an adult making decisions, even like President Clinton, 3 strikes you out. At the time, a lot of violence was going on. That's the reason.
You gotta get the question.
Okay, I appreciate you. The question is, I appreciate you bringing up the aspect of making a viable way, but my question is, can you bring more affordable housing to Ward 8 in cooperative living? They have replaced 100 units being sold by Lustings Realtor in Northeast. Could you take those units and turn them into a co-op? Thanks.
Thank you for the question. One of the things that a lot of people don't know about some of the projects that are being built or developed or rehabbed is that our city will give the rich and wealthy families those properties for $1. Lusting being one of those families. And then turn around and give them $1 million or $2 million to renovate that project. And how do I know this? Because I served as a senior manager in the Department of Housing and Community Development for 5 years and watched this craziness go on over and over and over again. So what I say should happen is that we open the door to allow the small developers that are right here in the city and allow them to be a part of that development that takes place increasing small business opportunity, increasing the employment opportunity for those who work for those small businesses, because a number of these other companies don't hire residents here. That's why we see such a huge number of unemployed people in Ward 7 and Ward 8. It's ridiculous. As 25 years I've been in this city, I've watched that go on and on and on again. And we're never gonna have a chance to change that until we change the landscape of who's doing that work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. We have another question.
Yes, I have a question. My question is, I see many of our educators and DCPS do marvelous jobs. They're working hard to make sure that our children can get the best education that they can. But we still have some students that are struggling to get to reading level, that are struggling to get where they need to be in terms of math as well. What can we do to ensure that our educators and our schools can get the resources that they need to help some of those students get to level?
Mr. Marshall.
So, is this on?
Let's do a 60-second answer.
60.
60.
Okay. So as the father of a 2-year-old, child literacy is something that's hugely important to me. And I think we need to get away from this notion that we have some kids who live in certain parts of the city that can learn and some that can't. Like, let's be honest about this. There is a direct 100% correlation between the amount of time and resources that a family has and the educational attainment of that child. My wife and I got to work from home for 20 months during the pandemic. So we were able to read to our daughter every day. She heard thousands of words before she turned 3 months old. So the gap, that whole achievement gap, that whole education gap, it's really a resource gap. So if we're talking about closing some of these gaps, then we need to be talking about closing access to resources. So what I would do, for early development, if we were really serious about childhood development, we wouldn't be starting at 3 years old, we'd be starting at birth. Because that's when their brains are moving quickly. That's when they're developing thousands of new neural connections every hour. That's the time we're supposed to be able to work with the kids in order to make sure that they can learn as quickly as possible. And if we don't provide supplemental resources in the home for these children, that gap will never close, and especially if we don't start until they're 3 years old. They're already 3 years separated.
Thank you. Mr. Schwartzman, I saw you had raised your hand. I'll give you 60 seconds.
Yes, this goes back to the issue of eliminating child poverty, okay, which actually the trauma in a family living in poverty affects the child. It is a strong influence on a child's performance in school, as we just heard. And again, it's an achievable goal now. The highest TANF income support in the country is received by white children in New Hampshire. They get 60% of the federal poverty level. Do you know what black children get in DC? 37% of the federal poverty level. We can raise it to the highest level. That's the Fair Budget's demand, which I helped to fashion, and address seriously child poverty. And that'll go to the root of the problems that you just alluded to, Mr. Marshall. I think it's a very important. Thank you. Stop sign.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartzman. We're going to move on. That stop sign scares you. It's okay. We can do rolling stops here. No, it's all right. A rolling stop is okay. I'll allow it. Another question?
Hi. I have a very simple question which I would direct to everybody, and I want a direct answer. Please no participating and lecturing. I'm sure every one of you will say, I agree, and you support DC statehood. In order to be a state, you have to do very specific things. Currently, all DC people who are convicted of felonies are housed in the Bureau of Prison system and sent hundreds of miles away from DC. Specifically, where would you house people in DC who are convicted of felonies? Specifically. I don't want to hear the answer. I don't want to hear lectures. I don't want to hear about the problem. Answer the question, please. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. We'll start with Mr. Hill.
All right. Well, you might not like it, but I would worry about where I'm going to house those who are incarcerated in the city. Our systems right now move people across the country because we don't have our own prison. So if we had our own prison, then we would have the room for those to be here. But if we don't get that, that's not going to be the staple as to where we become a state. What makes us a state is when we start operating like one. We can do that right now. We can do that right now. We didn't need to wait till a prison is built. The only thing that if we build a prison right now is we make more room for those who are here that are committing the crimes that call for them to be incarcerated. So I am not one who believes that we have to have a prison here.
Mr. McLaughlin will go down the line.
Yeah, just due to the legality and home rule issue, I don't necessarily know here, but I will speak to one other point, which is I absolutely believe that we should
Can
take
you speak into
over
the mic,
federal
please?
parole. I said some really good stuff before you all began. But I absolutely believe that we should take over federal parole and move it back to DC. I think this is a social justice issue. I think this is an effective finance issue and something where we can really support reentry in a much more effective way.
Thank you. Mr. Schwartzman.
Well, my friend Jabari asked a good question. First of all, those who have committed felonies, for what crimes? Nonviolent drug results, victims of the drug war? I say bring them back and get them out of prison, number one. Okay, they shouldn't be in prison. Secondly, if you want to build a DC jail, which there are plans for, I would say at least make it as good as the mass murderer in Norway is living. It's basically a nice apartment he's living in. In other words, we need to provide rehabilitation for the violent criminals, let's say, rehabilitate them in a humane way and not torture them, which is going on in prisons all over the country.
Okay, thank you. If we can keep our answers brief, we have a long line of questions, and I want to get to everyone this evening.
Thank you for the question. I would like to see a facility, maybe by the Judiciary Square, to save time on, travel.
So I'm going to actually answer two questions. First, part of this would be a distributed series of small-scale halfway houses distributed throughout the city so that people actually have a place to stay when they come home. But for the actual facility itself, we can buy land in Maryland. Like, we actually have a larger budget than both of the counties. They can sell us the land. We can get it zoned so that we can use it for the facility. That way, at least they're close, their families can visit, and we're not taking a large amount of district land off, but people don't have to hop on a plane or ride a bus for 5 hours.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Thank you. Are there questions on this side that okay.
Hello. I actually have two questions. Is that okay?
If you could just go with one, we do have a long line.
Okay.
Thank you.
My first question is directed towards Mr. Hill. How do you think that you can be an effective counsel at large if your method is to use scare tactics for your politics? Your care seems to be more pointed towards finances and the easiest solution, which is locking people up.
Thank you for that question. One of the things that I need people to understand is that I'm not trying to scare you. When I hear a gun go off and someone is committed first or second degree murder, and we have people on the council and across the city that says, oh, we need to love up on them. Understand this. Whenever anybody gets in trouble and that gun goes off, I've never seen anybody dial love, peace, or understanding. But everybody dials 911. And when they dial 911, they're looking for someone to come in and shut it down, remove the threat. Now, after this person has been removed from the street and is no longer a threat, then we can bring in some of those wraparound services that you hear everybody talk about. The comprehensive plan that includes rehabilitation. But while this is going on day to day, and every day we hear it, there's no way in the world you're going to convince me we should love up on somebody who just took somebody's life. Thank you.
Thank you. Another audience question?
Yeah. I got a question for all you guys you've answered, and it is, I see a lot of the development is finally making it to east of the river. Is it gonna reach there affordably, so that people that actually live there can actually afford to live there? You know, it's like one of these things where I see a lot of nice stuff going up, but I can't afford none of it. I mean, I make $91,000 a year, and I still can't afford to live in none of this new stuff they're putting up. What y'all gonna do about it? Our old mayor for life, Marion Barry, he always made sure, not that you had cutaways for the poor people, but that the stuff was affordable. He put a cap on it. Don't go above this so that people can afford to live here. Nobody can afford to raise a family. It's become a millennial town.
Thank you for your question, sir.
Yeah, tell me about that.
We'll start with Mr. Marshall.
Actually have a solution for this. And as long as I'm doing this, please check out my website, marshallforddc.com, where we've got more detail on this. But the short answer is we can actually structure the incentives using existing tools like the Housing Production Trust Fund to make sure that people can actually afford to buy and stay in their homes. One of the things I also would like to do is make sure that when we apply the homestead deduction, it's automatic. Like it actually, I know a decent number of people who don't have the homestead on their house, so their tax rates are going up a lot higher. But I think if you have certain income qualifications, the ability for you to actually be able to afford your house is a little stressed by our current system. Finally, I think we need to really make an examination of how we determine affordability. We need to be talking about housing burden instead of just the idea of what AMI is. One of the things I want to do, one of the things I will do as your council member, is make sure that our programs are set up so that if you need affordable or low-income housing, it truly does not take more than 30% of your income.
Mr. Niosi?
I would say one of the biggest things that we can do is actually listen to the members of the community that are being impacted by the development. Round tables go a long way, especially if you're having your A and C there, and we can have some semblance of, these are the concerns, these are what we want. Because without the community involvement, development shouldn't necessarily be happening if it's not what you want. So that would be the biggest thing, is just talking to the members of the community where the development is looking to go to find out if that's what they want.
Oh, wait.
No.
Yes, we want the development, but we want it affordable. That's what we're saying.
Thank you, sir. Mr.
I have 20 seconds. Okay. I understand the nuance of what exactly you're saying, and I still think it holds true. If we speak with the community to figure out what exactly they're looking for affordable, it still goes a long way. I understand what your nuance, but that's what I'm still saying.
Mr. Schwartzman?
Well, we've already heard that there were approximately 10,000 vacant houses that could be renovated. There is a District Opportunity to Purchase Act. The rules may need to be changed a bit, and the DC should buy these properties and develop them to affordability for homeowners, that their mortgage would be no more than 30% of household income. That's one step. The Warden Hotel needs to be, instead of being turned over to the luxury housing, it needs to be social housing. To again, make it truly affordable, decommodify the supply of housing, okay? It's a human right. Stop sign.
There's an 84x black white wealth gap in the city, a 32x Hispanic white wealth gap in the city. As we all know, that's because of hundreds of years of structural racism and active disinvestment by the federal government in stopping black people from owning homes. One of the things I think we talk about in this discussion of affordability a lot is rental versus owning. And I think the best way that you stop gentrification is a 30-year mortgage. Again, I said some really good stuff before. But could everybody hear me before, or should I start over? Okay. I was really just getting rolling, too. Now I have 5 seconds. But the best way to stop gentrification is a 30-year mortgage. I think there's a lot more we can do on owning, because no matter if the prices are going up, and we can do some things on property taxes, but if you own your home, it is the #1 wealth creator. And if we're going to stop the wealth gap, if we're going to create pathways to opportunities for generational land and wealth, we have to focus on home ownership.
Thank you. you. Again, I'm going to be completely different than everybody else that has spoken today. I am one who says that you need to increase the pay. You need to increase the income. The opportunities that we have do not fix the milk, the repairs, the insurance, everything that goes up with those homes. And if we don't make sure that we have the pay to go along with the increase of living, we're not going to fix the problem. We're only going to put a Band-Aid on a part of it. So, as I said before, when it comes to our government employees that I announced, police, fire emergency staff, our public school staff, and our sanitation workers, as a model of what can be done when we put them into above the average median income. Thank you.
There's a housing-related question, housing and safety-related question that came in from our viewers on Facebook. Have we explored the idea of forfeiture of property of landlords who refuse to keep housing stock up to code? Long-term refusal to keep property up to code contributes to public safety issues. So, if you want to weigh in on that, Mr. Marshall, we'll go down the line real briefly, and then we'll go back to our audience questions.
30 seconds.
30, we'll be here all night if we don't do that.
Okay, quickly.
I'll take 20.
So quickly, yes. We have multiple tools in order to punish bad actors for using their properties as extractive mechanisms from underprivileged communities. We have the ability to use eminent domain, we have DOPA, and we also have the ability to condemn property. We haven't done it because our government's not efficient. Once we get the property, we don't know what to do with it. But if we fixed that mechanism and also used it as a means to create additional housing, particularly for low-income families, absolutely.
Landlords should absolutely be held accountable if they're going to be negligent with their responsibilities. I think that, kind of what Kareem just said, those are all the various programs that we have at our disposal. We should utilize them, but make sure that we have a plan before we act.
Mr. Schwartzman.
Our President Attorney General has taken some legal action against these slumlords, but I think we need very vigorous action, and I'd like to see them some housed in their new DC jail, matter of fact. The very rich don't often go to jail. You know that. You know who ends up in jail. And they should be rehabilitated too. My time.
Well, first, I want to shout out React Radio and the Facebook group here that's getting these questions into us. So thank you. Thanks for everybody online. Yeah. Come on, I'm not going to be mad at you there. I only have 5 seconds now. But a lot of the comments that are just said. The one thing I'll say is I think it's really hard to just say, oh yeah, we should take people's property and really not think through what are the consequences of some of those decisions. So I do think you have to be thoughtful, but also ensuring that you don't have people just let property lie fallow when there's so many people who need housing.
What we are talking about is the slumlords that are in the city. And I say absolutely they ought to be penalized, because one of the things that I've found in my 30 years as a building inspector, lead-based paint risk assessor, and asbestos inspector is that some of them don't even care. All they care about is the subsidy money that comes from the government. Now, the government will still pay their rent, but they won't make sure they have safe living conditions. And that's got to stop.
I don't know if there's a microphone over there, but let's go to this question and then we'll go to your question.
I am a local pastor, Pastor Michael Campbell, and I also sit on the board of ACOA Mental Health as a secretary and a board of directors. So my question is concerning mental health. I hear a lot about crime and when it's taking place. I am one who calls love, peace, and happiness when there's a crime that takes place. I am one who believes that we need to focus on mental health. So my question is, ranging from police officers who appear to need mental health training, to teachers that need mental health training, to our students and our youth, what are your specific plans for mental health reform in this city? Because there's clearly a big need for it.
Thank you for that question. Mr. Niosi, we'll start with you.
60 seconds or how long?
30.
Okay.
Give me your elevator pitch.
20
30.
seconds.
This This is the elevator pitch.
Thank you for the question. I think that training is above all else something that is essential for our police officers and for our teachers, etc. So I would start there. I would start with making sure that people know, and I would also try to fund the appropriate measures to have psychiatrists or psychologists involved in the training as well.
When there is a crisis, people call 911, right? It's not operating very well, right? We know that. They've already been in order of that. However, when there are instances of, disputes and a mental health breakdown or whatever you would call it, where people are acting out, instead of being shot by police, I would submit that people should be attended by mental health professionals, social workers. This is not a police job. Okay?
Thank you very much. Mr. McLaughlin, then we'll go to Mr. Marshall and Mr. Hill.
I mean, I can't answer how would we overhaul the mental health situation in 30 seconds, so I'll give you one thing and then I'll tell you a story. One, I think we increased the Medicaid reimbursement rate on mental health professionals. Government pays 70 cents of that. Huge opportunity to actually have more access and be able to not do it at a very high cost. Secondly, kid stole my bike a few years ago. A bunch of dudes who were just coming out of prison and me, we ran after him, caught him, he thought he was in real trouble. We prayed with him and dropped him off at the Metro. I think government can't save us on everything. How are we also building community bonds?
Mr. Marshall and Mr. Hill.
Again, I can't do this in 30 seconds, but what I will say is we really need to change the paradigm. I think the baseline problem that we have is that we actually don't have enough in mental health professionals because we haven't invested in making sure that the people who are going to serve these kids, serve these adults, are adequately trained and educated and ready to go out of school. So the first thing I would do is increase the supply. For a lot of our problems, we have to increase the supply. For housing, we got to increase the supply. But for mental health, we need more people who can actually help. So let's start there.
Thank you. I do not think we should overburden our police with that portion. Their position or their responsibility is to remove the threat, and then once that person has been removed from hurting themselves or anyone else, then we can have the clinicians come in to do an evaluation and begin that part of rehabilitation for that individual.
Thank you. We'll go to our audience.
Our timekeeper has a question.
Oh, okay. That's why you had the mic. Okay.
As a disabled vet, I've done my research for a lot of the states in our country. Most states give a person who is a disabled vet at 100% to the VA rating a lot of great benefits, such as taking away their taxes for their homes. DC doesn't do any of that because we're short on time. I think the only vet I heard on the panel was Mr. Hill. I want to ask you, Mr. Hill, was there another vet? Oh.
I'm not a vet yet.
I want to ask our active person and our vet, what do you think about doing in order to try to extend benefits for DC residents who are 100% disabled through the Veterans Administration?
Thank you for the question. I am actually one of those veterans battling the city on those issues right now. So one of the things that I will do as Councilor at Large is highlight how those other states benefit those veterans who have given their lives, their bodies, to make sure that everyone here has had a safe day, a safe week, a safe life. And when we point out the things that are most apparent, like housing, like jobs, like business creation, those are the things right now that we need coming home.
Thank you, Mr. Hill.
Thank you.
Mr. Nielsen.
Very much in the same category as Mr. Hill. I would also try to extend various grants for business, and anytime you could have some semblance of a fee waived, I'll try to do that, such as like your car registration fee. I'll try to waive that as a veteran.
Mr. McLaughlin wants to weigh in just real briefly so we can move on.
Yeah, if I may, thank you for your service. My father is also a 100% disabled veteran, so
A little closer to your microphone, please.
again, said some great stuff. Also a disabled veteran. But one of the things that I just wanted to point out is, number one, I think all of us would say the same thing, that on council, you represent everyone. So whether I have a visceral or lived experience, I want to make sure that everybody's being supported. And I think this is where, when we have groups of folks across the city who are in need of support, that because we're not a state, we don't provide, that we have to put key staff in place to do those things.
Thank you. Audience question.
Good evening. There are many locations throughout DC impacted by environmental hazards affecting DC residents' health, quality of life, and property values. For example, there are multiple Superfund sites, leaking storage tanks, poor air quality, and brownfields. What, if any, plans do you have to help to clean up the sites?
Mr. Schwartzman, we'll start with you. What plans do you have to clean up the Superfund and brownfield sites?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the full question. I'm a little hard of hearing, so please repeat the question.
There are many locations throughout DC impacted by environmental hazards that affect DC residents' health, quality of life, and property values.
Yes, I get it. I'm an environmental scientist, so this is very important to me. One of the biggest persistent hazards is lead in water. And unfortunately, I think residents in public housing are still potentially being subject to this hazard, especially children, also lead in paint. And this should be a priority to address. That's my short answer.
Mr. Marshall? And then Mr. Niosi.
So I was legislative director for the Department of Energy and Environment for 5 years, and I ran the environmental justice program for the last year and a half that I was there. Please go to my website. I have a lot more detail on these issues. But what I will say first is that our government has not been completely honest about the degree to which we have deliberately discriminated against neighborhoods by putting undesirable uses around poor black people. So the first thing I would do is start with honesty. Now, I've got plans on how I would deal with making sure that we actually had equitable access to education, equitable access to energy, dealing with some of the food inequalities, dealing with quality of our water and all that other stuff, but it's on my website. And I can actually take actionable steps on it because I know this.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall.
Thank
They
you.
can always log on for more information. All right, this is a teaser. Mr. Niosi.
Thank you for the question. As a project engineer, I would try to ensure that each one of these cleanup sites has a schedule and associated costs associated with that cleanup. So I think that that's something very important because there might be where not many people actually know where these cleanup sites are located. And so, again, communication is key, and I think integrity with your government resources is also key.
Mr. McLaughlin, Mr. Hill.
I'll be brief because a lot of good points already made, but we have to decide, are we serious about racial equity in the city? And are we serious about taking the very discrete, specific operational steps to change it? This is a good example. There are many others. There is information out there on the actions that we can take, and to Giuseppe's point, the very specific operational ways that we can. Do we have the political will as a city with the most money per resident of any city in the nation to take action on these things? I think we've seen the current council members
Thank you,
don't.
Mr.
I will. I think others on here will.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hill.
I'm gonna be real short. It's mismanagement. It's the people who are in DCRA and DEOE that have not done what they're being paid to do. That's why those sites exist. Most people don't know that every DC government employee got a paycheck during the pandemic, the entire time, while some of us had to struggle. So that's what we need to do. We need to have better oversight and management of these bad sites.
Thank you. We have a patient young lady who's been waiting.
Thank you. My question is regarding a public bank. Several states in the US have a public bank. Do we want one in DC? What do you know about it? Do we need to take our money out of Wall Street, and what are the benefits? Thank you. The question is to all the candidates.
Great question.
Thank you. We'll start with Mr. I'm sorry. We're going to start with Mr. Hill.
Okay, any bank, including public banks, need to be willing to reinvest back into the community. Right now, we have banks that come into the community, the people in that neighborhood put their money in the bank, and then many of what I've seen, they can't go in and borrow $10. Whereas in some of the other areas of the city, it helps them start businesses, it helps them finance homes and other things. So it needs to be a more balanced approach of what any bank will do in any community. Thank you.
Mr. McLaughlin.
Well, since we don't know where $80+ million went in the Housing Production Trust, I don't know if DC running a bank is the greatest idea, but I do like the concept of, how are we thinking about cooperatives? How are we thinking about money staying local and being circular? So I think to your broader point, both the DC Green Bank that I think is doing some powerful work on environmental projects, but also the idea of how are we incenting co-ops? How are we incenting small and local businesses to be shared ownership? Those types of things are absolutely the things we need to be doing.
Yes, I've been on the steering committee of the DC Public Banking Center for 7 years, and this objective should be front on a priority for the new council. What does it mean? Our revenue is now being housed by the Wall Street banks, so it's not benefiting DC. A public bank, our revenue would go in our own publicly accountable bank, independent of the politicians, and then partner with local banks and promote like social housing and other great benefits, green jobs, and so forth.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. To be honest with you, this isn't really a lane that I'm familiar with. I'm not into financials, so I don't have a great answer for you. I will actually put this in my notes and look it up. Thank you for the question, though.
Mr. Marshall.
So I actually worked on the Green Bank legislation when we were writing it, and we had to do some really interesting things to get the authority to actually lend money. It's not really consistent with the Home Rule Charter. But let's be clear about our money. We've got our operating account, and we've got our capital borrowing that we do. As far as our operating account where we house our money, I think we should actually look into how we can make sure that we're spending that money in a way and using that money in a way to create additional political power for our residents. As far as borrowing, I don't know that we'll actually ever be able to borrow from ourselves for capital purposes, but for operating, I think so.
Thank you. Another audience question.
Good evening. As you know, on the council, a lot of the work is done within committees, so I'm interested to hear from each of the candidates. What are the 3 committees you lobby the chairman to sit on if you are elected to the council?
And we'll keep our answers brief. 3 committees. We'll start on that end of the table.
Okay. So the 3 that are nearest and dearest to my heart are the Housing Committee, because it really needs help. I would love to work on education and environment, because I've got 7 years of experience in it.
Thank you for the question. For me, it would be public safety, education, and local business community.
It would be human services. It would be the agent. Now the name escapes me. The agency dealing with environmental issues and tax and revenue.
Economic development, public safety, housing.
Operations, housing, and economic development.
Okay, we have 2 more audience questions. We do have 1 additional question on WeAct Radio, and we'll go to our audience. Young lady in black.
Good evening. If elected, how would you manage the responsibility of the legislature to have oversight over government agencies to ensure that their performance indicators are utilized for racial equity?
We'll start with Mr. Schwartzman. We'll start in the middle. 30 seconds.
30 seconds. What can you say in 30 seconds? This challenge must be addressed. Oversight, but we need to bring the public into it. And I would use my office as a resource and my salary to help organize the public right? To help organize the public to make the elimination of racial and economic disparities happen.
Mr. Hill, Mr. McLaughlin.
Thank you. First, we need to make sure that we have the educational piece uplifted. We then also need to make sure that we eliminate the food deserts. And then lastly, we need to make sure that those residents in all of those communities have equal access and opportunity to building businesses or employment, meaningful employment with our government.
I think this is the most critical question of council members, the idea of the oversight, and what I see of the council members who are running against is sort of the polarization of either really performative's a little too strong, but the idea of you're always kind of playing gotcha and catching folks, and you don't have a collegial relationship, or just kind of absent. And I think number one, have to have collegial focus, but holding accountable oversight overall. That doesn't get to your racial equity part, but overall, and then have political will on racial equity to really say that is a critical aspect of KPIs.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall and Mr. Nichols.
So I will lead off with this. You don't have to be an enemy of the mayor to hold her accountable, and you don't have to be a bootlicker to work with her. It's completely possible to be independent and still hold the executive accountable. So that's the first thing I would start with. Secondarily, oversight needs to be a year-round thing. You can't go on school tours in August and then expect things to get fixed before school's open. Like that just doesn't work. Additionally, when I structure hearings, I would structure the hearings in a way where we had a day just for public witnesses. They'd be in the afternoon so they could actually show up. And then finally, I would be more aggressive about confirmation. We can't wait for confirmation, approve somebody, and then turn on them after they're appointed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nielsen.
Thank you. So, again, it's a 30-second answer. Not a lot can be said, but one of the things that I would really like to do as council member is be involved in all like wards and ensure that you're present in all like wards. But also have community roundtables to make sure that every voice is being heard. I think that was the one thing that I heard door knocking was people just don't feel represented by the current council. The status quo is just not working for everybody. And then lastly, making sure that we have proper oversight of anything that is a program for funding so we can have some semblance of return on investment for everybody.
Thank you. And our final audience question.
How you doing? I have a question on families that's stricken with taking care of their loved ones who's they only have their loved ones retiring. It's a lot of people who have dementia, so a lot of families are becoming sick. And so how can the government assist people like that who they may have $50,000 because the income is so high, but at the end of the day they have to take care of them and they're no longer accepted by Medicaid or anything like that?
We'll start with Mr. Hill. Mr. Hill, Mr. McLaughlin, and then we'll do Marshall and Nielsen.
This is one of the problems that we have when we talk about housing and many other issues when it comes to health. The income barriers need to be raised. When I talked to the council and the mayor some years ago, 4 to 5 years ago, I showed how 37 states did away with real property tax for senior citizens, and we still haven't done it. That's another thing that would help out with your challenge.
I think the scenario you outlined there would probably be a home health aid. Home health aids on Medicaid or Medicare reimbursement are incredibly low. I think we need to increase those reimbursement rates, which would create living wages, which would create improvements in retention rate, and would actually also create pathways to careers for district residents. And we could do all of that in a relatively cost-effective way because it would open up ARPA funds if we increased the reimbursement rate. I know that's a really wonky, nerdy response, but that's the type of stuff that we have to go into the details on to be able to support people.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall, Mr. Niosi, and then Mr. Schwartz.
Okay, 30 seconds. Increase your pay, eliminate their taxes, and make sure that you guys have stable access to all the things that you need in order to support your life. We don't do a very good job of supporting people who are most in need, particularly folks who make $50,000 or below. I said it before, if you make $300,000 a year as a single person, you're good. It doesn't matter how inept the government is. Eventually you might leave, but if you make $50,000 or less, the government can't miss, and we are missing a lot right now.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Very much to echo what the majority of people have been saying on the council, or the forum. I would say to help subsidize the taxes for seniors. I think that's a big thing. But all these decisions need to be made with a lot of empathy to really understand the plight of what's actually going on in the household. And so making sure that we have different funded programs that can work with the seniors.
I've been an advocate for progressive taxes in DC for over 20 years, and one of my ideas that's being considered by Fair Budget Coalition is to have a sales tax rebate for low-income taxpayers. That's the most regressive part of our tax structure. That is, the low-income folks pay a greater percentage of income as sales and excise tax than the wealthy do. So let's give the low-income folk a check back for their sales tax that they pay.
Thank you very much. One last question, our final question before we wrap up the evening from our folks watching online with LEAC Radio. What is the social equity plan for DC cannabis proprietors? And I'll give everyone 30 seconds to answer that, starting with Mr. Schwartzman.
Right, repeat that question, please.
I'll go on. The people of DC have voted for Initiative 71. What's the inherent problem that the city council chairman has with exercising that initiative?
Oh, yes.
What is the social equity plan for DC cannabis proprietors?
The voters voted to implement Initiative 77?
71.
71? Oh, yes, sorry. I'm getting them mixed up. Yes, of course, we should decriminalize drugs in DC. Absolutely. And if necessary, defy the federal authorities and they'll go to court and cancel it, and then we pass the law again. We have to push the limits of home rule to create a movement to get statehood.
Thank you very much, Mr. Niosi. Mr. McLaughlin.
Thank you for the question. I do think that the decriminalization of or people incarcerated for marijuana use, I think that is just wrong. And so I would be for doing anything to make sure that those individuals get back on track with life.
Talking about racial equity KPIs, we lock up a bunch of folks. They are the ones with experience on how to run the business, and they're the ones that now don't get to be able to run the business legally. And we throw up our hands and say, boy, I don't know why people can't get jobs when they're coming back. We've basically created like 6 winners in a system instead of really truly being equitable and saying, hey, on I-71, let's ensure that folks can make a living in a legal, effective way.
Mr. Marshall, Mr. Hill.
I think we need to treat it like it's a taxable product. I don't smoke myself, but I do think that we've over-criminalized marijuana just based off racism. Like it's not the boogeyman that we want it to be. And if we really want to be equitable about this, we have to actually make sure that it's treated and regulated. It's just as bad as alcohol, so let's treat it just like alcohol.
Mr. Hill.
I agree that it should be measured just as alcohol. As a business owner, you can't come to work with me smelling like marijuana in the morning and getting one of my $200,000 trucks and think you're going to drive around the city. Now, I've seen where construction companies in this city right now will not hire you because you can't pass a urine exam. So we got to get smart about what we want and knowing what we're going to lose if that's what we want to use.
Ladies and gentlemen, your candidates for at-large council member here in DC. Well done, everyone. Thank you so much again to Delta Sigma Theta, DC Black United Front, Federation of Community Associations, and We Act Radio. I'm Delia Gonzalez from WUSA 9. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for engaging our candidates, and we'll see you in November.